I want to make my own case that upon an honest analysis of the world we find ourselves in, it should compel us to dismiss the hypothesis of a supernatural creator.
Bummer. Alex O'Connor doesn't believe that God exists, but he's a fallen away Catholic, and I understand because I used to be a fallen away Catholic myself, so I will be praying for his return to his Catholic faith. It's understandable to be in the position that he's in, but it's not understandable to remain in that position. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and we're going to briefly go through Alex's 3 objections to the existence of God. We're going to give a Catholic response to them, and then close with a Catholic proof for God's existence. But first, let's listen to Alex.
This strange phenomenon is known as the problem of divine hiddenness. If there is a God, then simply, why is he hidden from so many of us so much of the time? If theism is to offer a sufficient account of reality, then it must offer an account of what J.L. Schellenberg has famously labelled non-resistant non-belief.
So Alex's first objection is God's hiddenness, but God simply is not hidden, whether we look at it from the subjective or the objective side. Subjectively, we all have this experience of conscience. As Aquinas says, whenever you have an arrow shooting in a certain direction, you have to ask, who is the archer? So engraved in our minds is what's called the first principle of practical reason, that the good ought to be done and the evil ought to be avoided. This law, it can be obscured, but it can never be erased. And so we have to ask the origin of that law. It's where we get these judgments of conscience. And now the atheists will chalk that up to what they call the herd instinct. So this feeling, maybe through evolution, for self-preservation, not of oneself, but of one's community, of the people around him. But as C.S. Lewis points out, if, for example, I hear a woman screaming in the middle of the night in the street, I'm going to have a feeling to take care of myself, protect myself. That's a self-preservation instinct. I'll have a feeling towards, an impulse pulling me towards that sound to help. But then there's going to be a third thing over and above those two feelings, which is not a feeling, but it is a judgment. This is a judgment that I'm going to make based on that law. And that judgment is going to be an imperative on my heart that I must follow. And if I don't, I'm going to feel guilty about it days from now or weeks from now. So this experience of conscience subjectively. Objectively, we have Aquinas' 5 ways. The first, the third, I defend on the Think Catholic YouTube page. Feel free to check those out. The fourth we look at on the Think Catholic podcast as well. So whether subjectively or objectively, God simply is not hidden to those who are seeking him in goodwill. This is his first objection, that God is hidden, the hiddenness of God. But as it says in Romans, the eternal power and deity of God has been manifest through the things that are created. So they are without excuse. So all are without excuse to knowing that God exists. Let's take a look at Alex's second objection.
But it does get worse yet. You'll remember that my second fact that I said that I would bring up is the geographical predictability of religious belief. Not only does theism need to account for non-resistant non-belief, but also for the fact that such belief is unequally present across the globe.
So Alex's second objection, he's saying something to the effect of, if God exists and he must be loving, and if he's loving, he must will the salvation of all, so that all might believe in him. But it's very clear that all do not believe in him. And in certain geographies, many believe in him, but in other places of the world, almost nobody believes in a monotheistic God. Therefore, either God is not loving, therefore not perfect, and doesn't exist that way, or simply just the reality that many don't believe in him shows that it's more likely that he doesn't exist. But if it's true that there's evil in the world, which Alex is going to talk about in his third objection against the existence of God, then if there's evil in the world, and it's true that many of us commit our own evils, then it's not in strict justice that God would manifest himself or give an overabundance of assistance to lead to the knowledge of him. It wouldn't be an injustice if he didn't do those things. It would actually be an act of mercy if he gave an additional help to draw men towards himself. And acts of mercy are not demanded by strict justice. So it's not an injustice if God allows evil men to their own devices to not seek after him. It's more of a miracle that us who are broken, who are chasing trivial temporal things, it's a miracle that us who pursue pleasure and power are seeking God, that we do seek truth And so it's an act of mercy, not in strict justice, that the Lord would give super and overabundant assistance or help. But as we discussed in Alex's first objection, it is manifest that God exists, so all are without excuse. So this is the second objection, that many do not believe in God. It seems that would contradict his goodness, but if it's evil men that don't believe in God, then it does not contradict his love or his goodness that he leave them to their own devices. Let's move to Alex's third objection.
But the existence of meaningless or unnecessary suffering does seem to be incompatible with the existence of a God who loves us and has the power to prevent it from happening.
This is the famous problem of pain. Alex is calling it the problem of suffering, but he's implying that suffering is an evil, that it's wrong. So it's the problem of evil. It's a favorite among atheists, and so I'm going to respond to it with an atheist, J.O. Mackie, and his work, The Miracle of Theism, who was quoted by the 1980 Time magazine as the most ablest of atheists in his day. He actually responds to this argument himself. He says, "We cannot indeed take the problem of evil as a conclusive disproof of traditional theism. Let us call pain, suffering, disease, and the problem of evil and the like first-order evil. We'll contrast with these, for example, pleasure and happiness will then count as first-order good. Distinct from this will be second-order good, which somehow emerges in an organic whole, a complex situation, in which some first-order evil is a necessary component. That is, the first-order evil is logically, not merely causally, necessary for the emergence of the second-order good. Exactly how this emerges will vary from case to case. It may be simply the heightening of happiness by contrast with misery, or it may include sympathy with suffering, heroism, and facing dangers. Since this defense is formally possible, and its principle involves no real abandonment of our ordinary view of the opposition between good and evil, we can concede that the problem of evil does not, after all, show that the central doctrines of theism are logically inconsistent," end quote. From this, Alex will go on to speak about gratuitous suffering, but just because there's suffering that we can't in this moment see how a greater good is going to come out of it doesn't demonstrably mean that there is no greater good. And so Alex will talk about, well, maybe it's more likely or more probable. In response to this last objection, I would like to turn it into a proof for God. And I would like to argue that objective disorder presupposes objective order, which requires an objective orderer, or universal intelligence or cause for that order. As St. Thomas says, quote, "Hereby we refute the error of those who said that there is no God through observing the presence of evil in the world. On the contrary, he should have argued, if there is evil, there is a God. For there would be no evil if the order of good were removed, the privation of which is evil. There would be no such order if there were no God," end quote. Thus, the problem of evil becomes the proof of an objective and universal order. And this is what C.S. Lewis ran into in his own conversion towards Christianity. He said, "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line." What C.S. Lewis is saying is you can't say 1 + 2 = 5 is objectively wrong unless there's an objectively correct answer. And so if there is objective evil in the world, there must be an objective law or standard by which to judge it evil. And then we have to ask, if there is an objective universal law in things, in the nature of things, then there must be a just as objective universal lawgiver at the level of a thing's nature, and that's what we mean by God. Now, of course, the objector could just drop evil and suffering as something truly objective, but then it's no longer a proof against God and his objective goodness, as C.S. Lewis says. Of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own, but if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too. For the argument depended on saying that the world was really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my private fancies. Consequently, atheism turns out to be too simple. So those are the two alternatives. Either take moral relativism and then drop the problem of evil as an objection against God, or take evil as something truly objective, but then it can just become a proof for the existence of God. And so I know this was a short video from Alex, and I may be looking at more of his videos to come. But again, I would like everyone listening to this to pray for his conversion, to pray for my faith as well, and all those who are earnestly seeking after God but have yet to find him. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and thank you for listening.